Hi, thanks so much for joining me today. So go ahead and tell me your name and title and describe what you do for your business.
Hi, I am Christine Chang from Live Love Create Events. I'm the principal planner and founder of the company. And so what we are a boutique event and wedding planning service in LA, California.
So tell me a little bit about what your service does and how the business works as a whole when you're planning events or weddings.
Yeah, so as a wedding planning or event planning company, we do have different types of planning services. For those sometimes want their hands held the entire time. So we step in from the very beginning of the planning service as soon as they get engaged and kind of guide them through the entire journey. So we're the third wheel and we make things happen that way. There are other type of planners that or I'm sorry, there are other type of couples that want to do the planning themselves and kind of just hand it over for the tail end of it so they could enjoy the wedding. So we step in maybe a month prior, where they just offload everything and then we take care of it from that point on.
So it's a lot is goes on to planning weddings and we were kind of talking recently about how you're booked up basically the whole summer. It's wedding season. It's probably one of the busiest summers we've had so far and maybe setting records for the amount of weddings being planned this year. So how busy have you been? Just kind of describe what's been going on lately. Why are all these weddings happening all of a sudden? Why are all these events happening?
Yeah. So remember when the pandemic hit, um, all the weddings that were supposed to happen that year and for like 18 months to 2 years from the moment, weddings have not happened. So you can just imagine the bottleneck of what was supposed to happen, all flooding into, the previous year, this year, following, and even into 2024. So with the amount of weddings that didn't happen, you can just imagine, there is going to be a huge influx of couples that are wanting to get married. And so that's why it's so busy right now.
So when you would you get canceled on last year, maybe the past 2 years when things were maybe in the works and then the pandemic hit? And was business super slow where you had to kind of, I don't know, were there any struggles during that time when weddings weren't really happening?
Yeah. So the struggle was very apparent to anyone in the industry, but I think the event industry was hit very, very hard, especially with, it being tied to like different types of industries, such as like the food industry or even just down to like staffing industry. It just didn't happen. We didn't have a job for many, many months. So for the events that didn't happen, we were quick to adapt to try to figure out what's going to happen for the future, but there was a big lull for those 2 years where not much was happening. So the struggle was intense because we were kind of sitting around waiting to see what was going to happen, and the certainty was really, really making me think like, is this industry going to survive or not? But you know what? We're here now, and things are starting to line up. So we're happy that we're here.
Yeah, it's amazing because now you're thriving. You've been so busy and you went from that really slow lull during the pandemic and now everything is kind of hitting into high gear. So when you are booking weddings, are they the size that they used to be or are they pared down since the pandemic? I know a lot of people were doing smaller weddings during the pandemic. Are they kind of back to their regular um basically event sizes or has that been pared down as well?
I there's different types of weddings from the past, but into the future, we're seeing a lot of adjustments. Um, More popular was the small backyard weddings of like 20, 30 people, just like really immediate family, right when it was starting to open up again. We're starting to see that become a trend throughout. So we're not losing that trend quite yet because I think people are just like, oh, this is nice. I like to have small, intimate weddings. But the bigger weddings of what we're used to, the traditional weddings, are coming back with full force. So I think what we see is the wedding that we usually wouldn't do in the past, which is the small intimate weddings, coming into trend and kind of just staying there. And the big weddings of the traditional weddings have come back. So it's nice to see the different types.
Yeah, so what's the average size of your weddings right now that you've been planning into the summer?
Yeah, I think people, because of the fact that COVID is still, it has loosened up, but it's still, there's cases here and there still, so they're still being pretty conservative about it. Um, I would say average is about 100 to 150, 200 max. What used to be in the past of 300 to even 1,000 was really doable is now questionable sometimes for these guests or these couples. So they tone it down a little bit, which is still really great. 100 to 150 is a great amount of guests to still be able to like celebrate with your closest friends and family. So yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of the next thing I was going into, because we're kind of hitting a place in our nation where we're hitting inflation and things are going up in price, and people are having to charge more for flowers, for catering, for event space, and all sorts of those things. So is are you finding that been a struggle to kind of book those at the price points that your clients want them? And if so, how do you work around that when there's so many things that are going up in price, especially food and things that, maybe are some of these things have been doubled and even tripled in price?
Right. Right. So inflation is intense, and it's not just in our industry, it's in every industry. But where you see the most inflated prices is going to be like travel, food, and labor. Just, everybody knows gas prices are out of hand right now. So when you want to book a planner, or even just the food or catering or florist or DJ, whatever it may be, what we used to not do was put a line item for travel fee is now kind of like the norm for us, because of the fact that what used to only cost us maybe $20 to get to our destination for the wedding is now triple, quadruple the price, because gas prices are just not what it used to be. So across the board, you'll probably see what used to not be there is the travel and maybe like the gas fee that we have to charge. And there's ways to work around it, of course. Like you can hire vendors that are more local to your venue, so that you don't have to pay for these travel fees. So keeping that in mind. And also there's different ways to kind of cut down in terms of your budget, because of the fact of inflation, is just choosing different things and different vendors to service. And that compromise might be a little burdensome, but you work with the planner to figure out what the best deal is for you, and then go from there.
So when you talk about the travel fee, is that the fee that it costs you as the event planner to get from place to place, that has to be added on top of, let's say if you're going to grab the flowers or you're going to get the food, is it something that you charge for the fees that you're having to take on due to inflation and gas?
Right. So even for me, if I was, so for instance, I do have a wedding coming up in Texas. I'm from LA. What used to just be literally maybe like $100 for a flight fee is double the price or triple the price. So that's something that, clients are not used to, but they do have to now pay for. Other things like, if I was coming from point A to B, and I had to make a stop in point A to C to the venue, and I had to stop at B to like pick up donuts or cake or whatever, and it's out of the way. What used to not be an issue because gas was a lot cheaper back then, I do have to put it on the client and say, hey, I think I do have to be reimbursed for the gas fee, because of the fact that it's just not the norm anymore.
And then let's talk about this Texas wedding that you're planning. So how far out did this client kind of get in touch with you, and how easy is it for you to book things when you're based in LA and then having to research venues and figure out what the best pricing is and talk to vendors out here? Kind of like walk me
Yeah.
through the process of how soon did she contact you, and what's the process of kind of getting this wedding plan? And when is the wedding actually, the one that you're planning in
It's
Texas?
it's 2023. So
Okay.
yeah, it's not anywhere close to today. So most clients at the very, very least will contact us a year prior to the wedding. Right now, we're starting to get inquiries for 2024, because of the fact that 2023, even though it seems like a far time away, it's not, because of the fact that vendors are being booked up so fast. On the supplier end, we've lost a lot of our friends through the pandemic. So the suppliers are at a minimal, and the volume is a lot higher. So if you can just imagine the amount of work that we have to do to try to service as many couples as possible, and we're starting to say no. So with keeping that in mind, I think 1 year prior is the minimum maybe you should think about. And the longer you wait try to hire somebody, it's the harder it is going to be to find somebody that might be local to you, which then, you have to start paying for travel fees and all that. So book them as soon as you can, and figure that out. And with my biggest thing is always look for expertise and ask as many people as possible to figure out what is the best choice for you. But working with the planner is going to save you a lot of headache and time, because we do know the nuances of when to book and how to book. So we'll save you a lot of time like vetting, so that you pick the right vendors for you.
So for you, have you had to raise your rates personally as a business to accommodate for inflation?
Yeah, unfortunately, I did have to. And that's not because of the fact that I wanted to, but it's because labor has become a lot hard to find. So, for luckily for myself, I do have myself and other planners on the team that are our core. But on the day of, we do hire day of planners that can help just for the day of. And these are hourly, and hourly, of course, is a lot harder to find in terms of labor. So, and the cost for labor is going up too, right? So keeping that in mind, so we do have to pay for that. So that is unfortunately like put on the client, because we do have to pay for labor. Travel is another big thing, because gas travel does not come at a cheap price these days. So that's something that we do have to raise our prices for. So it's unfortunate, but it's across the board, and it's here, and hopefully inflation goes down so we can bring it down again.
I know it's been struggle in almost in every business right now. And for the Texas wedding, how much is this kind of costing this client, and what city is it in? And kind of like the budgeting for, like, let's say you want to book a venue, is there has there been a price hike on that? Like, what has that been costing, especially for the one that's happening here in Texas? Just because I'm curious to see like what, if at all, like what people are going to have to expect to pay for when they're planning a wedding of this, maybe at least 100-person wedding.
Yeah, so it's in Austin, and Austin is a really beautiful city, and the Austin is also not a. It's starting to hike up in terms of prices, and it's not just Austin; it's just all throughout the U.S. So even just comparing it to events that are happening all across the U.S., what used to be under 100 guests, what used to be anywhere from, let's say, average of like 25,000 to 40,000, is now up to like 40 to like 60,000. So it's almost double the price, because of the fact that you're fighting now for these vendors, and so that premium plus the dates that are not available, you're fighting double time to get what you want. It's unfortunate, but I think when we look at the bigger picture of trying to celebrate and really just creating this moment to have a joyous moment with your friends and family, people overlook that burden of the cost, and they say, okay, it is what it is, and let's move forward and let's figure it out. So yeah.
So you're talking about vendors, so that includes flowers to DJ to the caterers to, so once they've raised their premium on everything, okay, I'll have to restart this meeting. But once they've had to raise their premium on everything, and you're telling like your clients, hey, this has gone up, does anyone kind of, like, what are their ways to go around that? Like, they just cut the guest list? Is that kind of the best way? Or maybe they do without like a photographer, or, depending on importance and that kind of thing. Like, how do you suggest, like, what's the biggest area you can kind of chop when you're
Mhm.
looking at budgeting?
Yeah. So cutting the guest list there's pros and cons to that, right? And it's actually the hardest decision to make when it comes to budget cutting, is cutting the guest list. So at times I don't suggest that, because of the fact that you do want to invite everybody that you want to invite. There are couples that are maybe a little bit more shy or intimate, and they're okay with doing that, and that's great too. But aside from cutting guest lists, I think the best way to go around it is, instead of maybe a sit down dinner, you do buffet style, or you hire a really good food truck. And I think that is really fun too. Fun too. Instead of doing like full blooms, maybe you go with greenery instead. And so that your cost for florals are not going to be as much as you want to spend. Or instead of doing, so this is a trend that I've been seeing a lot, is a lot of couples are already married on paper, or they've been married in court. So they cut the ceremony out because there's a lot of costs that go to ceremony, and they only have a really great party instead. So there's room to like go around, kind of just revising and making it your own. There's no rule that says it has to be this very cookie cutter ceremony, cocktail, reception. Like, there's so many different ways to doing it. So, and a sit down dinner is not typical these days, and more fun is hiring a food truck and maybe like a tap truck, a beer tap truck, and those are your main food and beverage, which is going to be at a minimal cost than doing a sit down dinner. So yeah.
Actually, that sounds super fun and creative. So, like, you would think that in someone's head it'd be a typical sit down dinner, but there are so many cool ways to kind of improvise and work around the cost and make it a kind of a different wedding. I think these days people are trying to adjust with the times. So, those
Yep.
kind of suggestions on kind of making it a little different, but still fun for people and feeding people and giving people drinks and food, there's ways to make it still doable
Hmm.
without, the by plate kind of thing. So, let's
Hmm.
talk numbers. Like, let's go through kind of what the differences are that you've seen before inflation, after inflation, or even with the loss of vendors and that kind of thing. Like a venue, that's what's kind of like been the price hike with a venue, or like flowers, like a DJ, a photographer, like what, like maybe percentage wise, or kind of give me like a rough idea, like how much that's gone up for people who are kind of interested and kind of eyeballing like what they have in their budget for weddings.
Yeah. What I used to see pre-pandemic for a venue was anywhere from just a couple thousand to maybe at most maybe 6, 7, 8,000. Um, it's a lot now. It's a lot now. You can probably you can probably imagine to spend anywhere from like 5 to 15,000, depending on which venue it is. So you can imagine like it hiked up maybe twice the cost. Even for florists too, I think it's not necessarily, there was a flower shortage for the longest time, so you did see that increase because now florists are not paying just $1 per stem for a rose. They're paying 3, 4, $5 per stem. So it's really really hard to figure out and gauge what that's going to look like because it's always fluctuating. So even with the florists, you can probably say anywhere from like 20, 30, 40% more than what you used to pay for. DJs, I think for DJs, it's more about the labor, the time and the labor that it costs to like get there, set up, gas. Like that's probably going to be the biggest increase for DJs. So and for food, as you can imagine, food is not going to be cheaper than pre-pandemic, obviously, and that alone there too, not just the food, it's food plus now the labor and gas all that's aligned with what's in the world of inflation. So, gosh, like it's really, really hard to say, but depending on which area you're in and depending on which vendor you choose, I think you're going to see at least a 20 to 50% increase in terms of costs for your wedding.
Wow, that's major. So it's definitely a good idea to plan ahead and kind of think through your budget. And if the sooner they can get in touch with you, then the sooner, I guess, like it would be, you can save up and think about like what you need and how much you need to kind of plan these weddings. What's kind of your best advice besides planning early for the future brides or people planning weddings now? And how should they kind of think of, how should they tackle everything from the moment they know they're engaged to looking out into planning their event?
Yeah. So for those, I mean, hiring a planner sometimes is not ideal, or maybe it's not in your budget to hire someone. So besides from hiring a planner, the most important thing to really, really think about is hiring a venue and believe it or not, your photographer first. These two will go fast. The fastest actually. Venue obviously because people need venues to get married in, and so you're fighting for the date. The next on your list is your photographer, because a photographer cannot be booked unless they have a date for your wedding, which is not going to happen unless you have your venue. These two are probably your first two that you want to hook to really just book. You want to book, but what is going to save you time and money is even if you can't hire a full-time planner, someone maybe a partial planner that can help you figure out what the big picture budget list is going to look like, because um, they reverse engineer what the overall cost is going to be depending on which venue you choose. So there are different nuances to a wedding, such as if this venue provides all tables, chairs, linens, blah, 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 that this venue doesn't, but you didn't know. And so if you book a venue that didn't have that, then you're spending thousands of dollars trying to rent these items that this other venue might have had. And you wasted a lot of money there, not kind of vetting that or having someone vet that for you. So yeah, those are my two next steps once you get engaged. And if you can, try to just talk to someone. Even if you don't book a wedding planner, we're more than willing to share our knowledge with you. So just call them and see what they say to try to help you guide you through this.
I love that. So for you, like, why is it important, maybe in a way to even, why would you save more, maybe even hiring you as an event planner than trying to do it on your own? Just besides the headache of doing it on your own, why hire a wedding planner, and is it budget friendly?
Yeah, sometimes people think hiring a planner is an additional expense on top of everything else you have to spend, but our job really is to figure out what the bottom line is going to look like with the whole inclusive, with everything included. And that includes your photos, your florist, your catering, whatever it may be. And we know what the line items look like so that it makes sense in terms of your overall budget. So if our goal and if we budget correctly, you shouldn't be spending more than what you've budgeted as a whole, including the planner in there. Now, if you can imagine trying to do this by yourself and vetting a dozen plus more vendors at a time to figure out what makes sense to you, it'll take a lifetime to really figure out what is going to work. And at the very end, you might have missed something because you're not used to doing this, and then end up paying extra for service or labor or food or cookies or whatever it is that you just didn't think of. So in the long run, our job is to keep you on track and help you figure out and vet the most reliable and most resourceful vendors there for you. So really, we're there to help you save.
It does sound like it is worth it. So with this 2 million, 2.5 million weddings set to occur this year in the US, you're part of all this in this big industry. Kind of any last thoughts on why it's important to kind of celebrate your wedding? And, we're coming out of pandemic and these times, and even with inflation, why it's a good idea to still have an event and a wedding, and it's to celebrate.
Yeah, having a wedding, small or big, there's no right or wrong. But I feel like during the pandemic, where our minds have shifted into knowing that our friends, our peers, our family, we are of value to each other. And we all kind of came together and our hearts just got stronger, and the bond is there where we just want to be with our close ones. And what better way to create that moment and have a celebration, you know, at your wedding. So, it's a super, super great idea and a great excuse to gather your close ones and just have a great time.